My son bought his wife a luxury home and then slid the mortgage papers across the dinner table to me. You have saved enough, Dad. It is time to help your family. When I said no, they did not just get angry. They sued me for $500,000. But they forgot one thing. I kept the receipts, and the judge asked them one question that ended their lives as they knew it. I am Douglas Bennett, 69 years old, and for 40 years I poured concrete and built the skylines of Seattle with my bare hands. I know the value of $1 because I have bled for every single one of them. But my son Brandon apparently missed that lesson. Before I tell you how I destroyed their greed in a court of law, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let me know in the comments where you are watching from. I sat alone at table 4 in the Capitol Grill. The ice in my water glass had melted completely, and the condensation was pooling on the white tablecloth. I checked my watch for the 5th time. They were 20 minutes late. It was my 69th birthday, but I was not expecting a cake. I was not even expecting a card. I just wanted my son to look me in the eye and acknowledge I existed. Finally, I saw them. Brandon walked in wearing a suit that cost more than my first car, and hanging on his arm was Vanessa, my daughter-in-law. She had that look on her face, the one she always wore when she was about to ask for something. It was a mix of fake sweetness and predator focus. They did not apologize for being late. They did not hug me. They slid into the booth opposite me, and before the waiter could even offer us menus, Vanessa reached into her oversized designer bag. She pulled out a thick, heavy folder and slammed it onto the table right next to my empty plate. The sound echoed in the quiet restaurant. "Happy birthday, Dad," Brandon mumbled, but he would not meet my gaze. He was looking at the folder. "What is this?" I asked, keeping my hands in my lap. I did not want to touch it. Vanessa smiled, but her eyes were cold. "It is our future, Doug. We found it. The perfect house in Bellevue. 5 bedrooms, a view of the lake, and a 3-car garage. It is $1.2 million. I looked at them. Brandon was currently unemployed, claiming he was finding himself. Vanessa worked in finance, but she spent money faster than she could print it. "That is nice," I said, keeping my voice even. "I hope you two will be very happy there." Vanessa laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "Oh, we will be. But the bank is being difficult about the debt-to-income ratio. They just need a guarantor, a co-signer." She opened the folder and flipped to a page flagged with a yellow sticky note. She uncapped a heavy, expensive pen and pushed it toward me. "We already filled out your information," she said. "You just need to sign here, and the down payment is 20%. We need you to wire $240,000 by tomorrow morning to lock in the rate." I stared at the pen. Then I stared at my son. 3 years ago, I sat in my kitchen with Brandon while he cried like a child. He had gambled away $40,000. He owed dangerous people. To save his life, I sold my Ford F-150, the truck I had driven for 20 years, the truck I loved. I paid his debts. I looked him in the eye that day, and I said, "This is the last time, Brandon. If you ask me for another cent, you are on your own." I pushed the pen back across the table. "No." The word hung in the air like a gunshot. Vanessa's smile vanished instantly. "Excuse me," she hissed. "I said no," I repeated louder this time. "I am not co-signing a mortgage for $1 million home. I am not wiring you $250,000. You cannot afford this house." Brandon finally looked up. His face was turning red. "Dad, stop being difficult. You have the money. We know you do. You sold the construction company 10 years ago. You have millions sitting in accounts doing nothing, while your son lives in a 2-bedroom apartment. It is embarrassing. It is not doing nothing." "Brandon," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous growl. "It is my retirement. It is the money I broke my back for. And I told you 3 years ago when I cleared your bookie debt that the bank of Dad was closed. Vanessa slammed her hand on the table, making the silverware jump. "You selfish old man. You are going to die soon anyway. What are you going to do? Take it with you. We deserve this house. Brandon deserves this. He has put up with you for years." "Put up with me?" I asked. "I paid for his college, I paid for his car, I paid his bail when he got a DUI. I paid his gambling debts. And now you want me to buy you a mansion in Bellevue." The waiter approached, looking nervous. "Sir, is everything all right?" Brandon stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back. He looked wild. He looked desperate. "No, everything is not all right," he shouted, and people at the nearby tables turned to stare. "My father is sitting on a gold mine, and he is forcing his family to live like rats. You owe me this, Dad. You owe me." I stood up slowly. My knees ached, a reminder of 40 years on construction sites. I looked at my son, a man of 38, who still acted like a spoiled teenager. "I owe you nothing," I said calmly. "And since you have money for $1 million home, you can pay for this dinner." I turned and walked away. I did not look back. But as I reached the door, I heard Vanessa screaming after me. "You will regret this, Doug. We will take what is ours. You will be sorry." I walked out into the cool Seattle rain, my heart hammering in my chest, not from fear, but from a deep, profound disappointment. I got into my old sedan, the one I bought used after selling my truck, and just sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel. My hands were shaking. It wasn't the anger. It was the realization that my son was gone. The boy I raised was gone, replaced by this creature of greed and entitlement. I started the engine and drove toward the highway. The rain lashed against the windshield, blurring the city lights. My phone started buzzing in the passenger seat. Once, twice, 10 times. I glanced at the screen. Text messages from Vanessa. "You are a monster. We are not done with you. You promised Brandon 10% of the company sale. We are going to make you pay." I frowned. Promised him 10%, I never promised him a dime. When I sold Bennett Construction, Brandon had not worked a day in his life. He called the company dirty work. He wanted nothing to do with it until the check cleared. I drove home to my small house in Ballard. It was a modest place, 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, built in the 50s. It needed a new coat of paint, and the porch sagged a little on the left side. To anyone looking from the street, it looked like the home of a man surviving on a small pension. They would never guess that beneath the floorboards in a fireproof floor safe sat the documents proving I was worth over $8 million. I walked inside and locked the door behind me. The silence of the house usually comforted me, but tonight it felt heavy. I went straight to the study and moved the rug. I spun the dial on the floor safe and popped it open. I needed to check my will. I needed to make sure everything was locked down tight, because Vanessa's threat in the restaurant felt different. It wasn't just anger. It felt like a plan. I pulled out the blue binder. My will was simple. It left a comfortable trust for Brandon, distributed monthly, so he couldn't blow it all at once, and the rest to various charities. I stared at the papers. Even now, after tonight, I was still protecting him. I was still trying to be a father. My phone pinged again. This time it wasn't a text. It was an email notification. The subject line made my blood run cold. Notice of civil lawsuit. I opened it. It was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Attached was a PDF. I put on my reading glasses and scrolled through the document, my breath catching in my throat. Plaintiff Brandon Bennett and Vanessa Bennett. Defendant Douglas Bennett. Cause of action, breach of oral contract and unjust enrichment. Amount demanded $500,000. I read the complaint. It was a work of fiction. It claimed that 10 years ago, on the day I sold my company, I had verbally promised Brandon a 10% share as compensation for his consulting services during the sale. It claimed I had withheld these funds, causing them emotional and financial distress. Consulting services. Brandon was partying in Cancun when I sold the company. He didn't even know I had sold it until he came back 3 weeks later asking for rent money. They were suing me. My own son was taking me to court for $500,000 based on a lie. I sat back in my chair, the glow of the computer screen illuminating the dark room. They wanted war. They thought I was a frail old man who would be scared of a lawsuit, who would write a check just to make the problem go away. They thought they could bully me like they bullied the bank. But they forgot who I was. I didn't get rich by being soft. I got rich by knowing how to build things that last and how to demolish things that don't. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in years. It was late, but I knew he would be awake. Jonathan Mitchell, the Shark of Seattle, the lawyer who helped me sell my company. He answered on the second ring. Doug Bennett. To what do I owe the pleasure? I am being sued, Jonathan. I said, my voice steady. By my son. There was a pause on the line. Then Jonathan let out a low, dry laugh. The kid who can't keep a job, what does he want? $500,000, I said. He claims I promised him a cut of the sale. Jonathan hummed. Oral contract. Hard to prove, but annoying to fight. Do you want to settle, Doug? Give him $50,000 to shut him up. I looked at the picture of Brandon on my desk, taken when he was 5 years old, holding a toy hammer. I looked at the lawsuit on my screen. No, Jonathan, I said. I don't want to settle. I want to destroy them. I want to make sure they never come after me again. I could hear the smile in Jonathan's voice when he replied. Then be at my office at 8 a.m. tomorrow. Bring everything. And Doug, wear your good suit. We are going to war. I hung up the phone. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my chair listening to the rain and thinking about the mortgage papers Vanessa had slammed on the table. Why were they so desperate? Why did they need $1 million house right now when Brandon was jobless? Why did they need $250,000 in cash by tomorrow morning? It didn't add up. Greed is usually patient. This was panic. The next morning at 7 a.m., a heavy fist pounded on my front door. I looked through the peephole. It was a King County Sheriff deputy. I opened the door. Douglas Bennett, he asked. Yes. You have been served. He handed me a thick envelope. The official papers. It was real. They had actually done it. I watched the deputy walk away, and I felt a strange calm settle over me. The sadness was gone. The disappointment was gone. All that was left was the cold, hard resolve of a man who has a job to finish. I drove into the city, the skyline gray and imposing. Jonathan's office was on the 42nd floor overlooking Elliott Bay. When I walked in, he was already waiting for me, standing by the window, looking like a predator in a three-piece suit. Let me see it, he said. I handed him the lawsuit. He flipped through it quickly, his eyes scanning the legal jargon. It is sloppy, he said, tossing it onto his mahogany desk. They are desperate. They cite witnesses. Vanessa's parents. They claim they heard you make this promise at a Thanksgiving dinner 10 years ago. They are lying, I said. Vanessa's parents hate me. They wouldn't come to my house for Thanksgiving if I paid them. Perjury, Jonathan said, shrugging. People do it every day for $500,000. But here is the interesting part, Doug. Look at the timeline. They filed this yesterday afternoon, an hour after you left the restaurant. They had this ready. This wasn't a reaction to you saying no. This was the plan all along. If you signed the mortgage, they would own you. If you didn't, they would sue you. They needed this money yesterday. Why, I asked. Why the rush? Jonathan leaned forward, steepling his fingers. That is what we are going to find out. I have a private investigator on retainer. A guy named Chen. He used to be FBI. If your son and his wife are in trouble, Chen will find it. But Doug, I need to know how far you are willing to go. If we dig, we might find things that put your son in prison. Are you ready for that? I thought about the way Brandon looked at me in the restaurant, the hate in his eyes, the way he let Vanessa call me a monster. He is not my son anymore, Jonathan, I said. He is a plaintiff. Treat him like one. Jonathan nodded. Done. Now let's talk strategy. We are not going to play defense. We are going to scorch the earth. They want to claim unjust enrichment. We are going to audit their entire lives. Every bank transaction, every credit card swipe, every tax return for the last 10 years. I spent the next 3 hours signing affidavits and authorizing deep background checks. When I left Jonathan's office, I felt lighter. I had a team. I had a plan. But the enemy was not sleeping. As I walked to my car, my phone buzzed. It was a notification from my bank. Alert attempted access. Incorrect PIN entered 3 times. Account locked. They were trying to hack my main accounts. They knew my old passwords, probably from when Brandon used to help me with my computer. I called the bank immediately and froze everything. Then I got another text. This one was from a number I didn't know. We know about the tax evasion in '98. Pay us or we send the file to the IRS. I laughed out loud in the parking garage. Tax evasion, I had been audited in '98, and the IRS ended up owing me money. They were bluffing. They were throwing everything at the wall to see what stuck. But this text confirmed Jonathan's theory. They were desperate. They were terrified. 2 days later, I was back in Jonathan's office. Chen, the investigator, was there. He was a quiet man who didn't blink enough. He placed a thin file on the desk. You were right, he said, his voice flat. It isn't about the house. The house is the laundry machine. What do you mean, I asked, Vanessa Chen said. She works as an internal auditor for a mid-sized investment firm. 6 months ago, she found a loophole in their accounts payable system. She started siphoning money. Small amounts at first, then bigger. She has stolen $300,000. My jaw dropped. 300,000, Chen nodded. But here is the kicker. The firm is engaging an external audit next month. She knows she is going to get caught. She needs to put the money back before the auditors arrive. I looked at Jonathan. The mortgage. Exactly, Jonathan said. She wasn't buying the house to live in. She needed the house to get access to a HELOC, a home equity line of credit. She needed you to co-sign so the bank would approve the loan fast. Then she would draw down the cash from the equity pay, back the money she stole, and hope no one noticed. And since I said no, I said, realizing the horror of it. Since you said no, Jonathan finished. She needs the $500,000 from the lawsuit. It is her golden parachute. If she gets the money, she pays back the firm and maybe flees the country. If she doesn't, she goes to federal prison for embezzlement. And Brandon, I asked? Does he know Chen slid a photo across the desk? It was a picture of Brandon and Vanessa arguing outside a bar. Brandon looks terrified. He knows, Chen said. He is listed as a co-conspirator on some of the shell accounts she used to move the money. If she goes down, he goes down. I sat back feeling sick. My son wasn't just greedy. He was an accessory to a felony. He was trying to extort his own father to cover up a crime. So what do we do, I asked. Do we call the police? Jonathan smiled a cold, sharp smile. Not yet. If we call the police now, the lawsuit drags on. We need them to admit it. We need them to hang themselves. How we are going to give them what they want, Jonathan said. A settlement meeting. We tell them you are scared. You are old. You don't want your tax secrets coming out. You want to pay. But I am not paying them a dime, I said. No, Jonathan agreed. But we are going to get them in a room. We are going to get them on record. And then we are going to drop the hammer. The meeting was set for Friday at the office of Brandon's lawyer, a man named Alvarez who worked out of a strip mall next to a dry cleaner. It was a far cry from Jonathan's glass tower. I wore an old cardigan and walked with a slight stoop, playing the part of the defeated old man. Jonathan walked beside me carrying nothing but a briefcase. Vanessa and Brandon were already there, sitting at a cheap laminate conference table. Vanessa looked triumphant. Brandon looked sweaty. So Alvarez said, smoothing his tie, "My clients are willing to drop the suit for $500,000. No admission of guilt. Just a clean break." I looked at Brandon. "Son, is this really how you want to do this?" Brandon wouldn't look at me. "Just sign the check, Dad. You have plenty. You won't even miss it." Vanessa leaned forward. "And we want it today. A cashier's check. Or we release the tax documents to the press." Jonathan spoke up. "My client is prepared to pay, but we need to clarify the nature of the payment for tax purposes. Is this payment fulfilling a contract debt, or is it a gift?" Vanessa's eyes narrowed. "Why does it matter?" "Because," Jonathan said calmly, "if it is a debt payment for the oral contract you claim exists, you will have to pay income tax on it. That is about 35%. If it is a gift, there is no tax for you." Vanessa and Brandon exchanged a look. I could see the greed calculating in their eyes. They didn't want to lose a third of the money to the government. They needed every penny to cover the theft. "It is a gift," Brandon blurted out. "It is a gift. He owes it to me for being a terrible father." Jonathan nodded slowly. "So you admit there was no oral contract? This is strictly a gift?" "Yes," Vanessa hissed. "Just give us the money." Jonathan looked at me. I stood up, straightening my back, shedding the act of the frail old man. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder. I placed it on the table. The red light was blinking. "Thank you," I said, my voice strong and clear. "You just admitted on tape that your entire lawsuit is fraudulent. There was no contract. You just wanted a gift. That is extortion." Vanessa's face went white. "You set us up." I picked up the recorder. "I am not giving you $500,000. I am not giving you 5 cents. And Brandon, I know about the audit at Vanessa's firm." The room went dead silent. You could hear the hum of the refrigerator in the break room. Brandon looked like he was going to vomit. Vanessa stood up, her chair crashing back. "You don't know anything," she screamed. "You are a senile old fool." I turned to Alvarez, their lawyer. "Counsel, your clients are currently under investigation for embezzlement and conspiracy. I suggest you check who is paying your retainer, because the money is likely stolen." Alvarez looked at them, horror dawning on his face. "Is this true?" "We are done here," Jonathan said. "We will see you in court on Monday, and we are bringing the FBI." We walked out of the office, leaving them in chaos. Vanessa was screaming at Brandon. Brandon was crying. It was pathetic. But it wasn't over. They were cornered rats, and cornered rats bite. Monday morning, the King County Superior Court. The courtroom was packed mostly with curious onlookers, but I saw Vanessa's parents in the front row glaring at me. They were the star witnesses ready to lie under oath. The judge, Honorable Justice Harrison, took the bench. He was a no-nonsense man with a reputation for hating time wasters. Alvarez looked like he hadn't slept. He tried to withdraw from the case, but the judge denied it, saying it was too late. The trial began. Vanessa's parents took the stand. They cried. They swore on the Bible that I had promised Brandon the money 10 years ago. They painted me as a monster who hoarded wealth while my son starved. It was a good performance. Then it was Jonathan's turn. He didn't call me to the stand. He called Brandon. Brandon walked up looking like a ghost. He took the oath. "Mr. Bennett," Jonathan began, holding a piece of paper. "You claim in your lawsuit that you worked as a consultant for your father's company and were promised 10% of the sale, correct?" "Yes," Brandon whispered. "And you worked very hard for that money, yes. I gave him the best years of my life." Jonathan walked back to his table and picked up a stack of documents. That is interesting, because I have here your tax returns from the last 10 years. In the year of the sale, you declared zero income. In fact, you filed for unemployment benefits. You signed a federal document stating you were unemployed and had no income prospects. Jonathan held up the two documents side by side. So, Mr. Bennett, I have a question. Were you lying to the federal government then, or are you lying to this court now? Because one of these is perjury and the other is welfare fraud. Which one is it? Brandon froze. He looked at Vanessa. She was staring straight ahead, refusing to meet his eyes. He looked at the judge. I answer the question, the judge boomed. I didn't work. It was a lie. The courtroom erupted. Vanessa put her head in her hands. Jonathan wasn't done. He turned to the judge. Your Honor, we move to dismiss this case with prejudice. But before we do, we would like to submit one final piece of evidence regarding the credibility of the plaintiffs. Jonathan handed a sealed envelope to the bailiff, who handed it to the judge. It was the report from the FBI, based on the information Chen had provided. The judge opened it. He read it in silence. His eyebrows went up. He looked over his glasses at Vanessa. Mrs. Bennett, the judge, said, his voice dangerously quiet. According to this report, the amount you are suing for $500,000 matches almost exactly the amount missing from the accounts you manage at your firm, plus the interest accrued. Vanessa stood up, trembling. That is a coincidence. You can't prove anything. The judge leaned forward. Mrs. Bennett, there are 2 federal agents standing at the back of my courtroom right now. They are not here for the architecture. Vanessa spun around. 2 men in suits were walking down the aisle. She tried to run. She actually tried to bolt for the side door, but the bailiff was faster. He grabbed her arm and she collapsed, screaming. It wasn't me. It was Brandon. He made me do it. Brandon jumped up. You liar, it was your idea. You stole the money, the judge slammed his gavel. Order in this court, but it was too late. The truth was out. The marshals handcuffed Vanessa right there in front of the judge. Brandon was arrested moments later as an accessory. The judge looked at me. Mr. Bennett, I apologize that your time was wasted. Case dismissed. The defendants are remanded into federal custody. I walked out of the courtroom into the bright Seattle sunshine. It was over. 6 months later, I sold the house in Ballard. I moved to a quiet community in Florida where the sun shines every day and nobody knows my name. I bought a boat. I fish in the mornings and I read in the afternoons. Vanessa was sentenced to 10 years for embezzlement and fraud. Brandon got 5 years for conspiracy and tax evasion. On Brandon's birthday last week, I sent him a card to the prison. It had no check inside, just a note. I taught you how to build things, Brandon. You chose to tear them down. This is the only inheritance you will ever get. The lesson that actions have consequences. Spend it wisely. I am Douglas Bennett. I am free. And I still have my receipts. The rain in Seattle never really stops. It just pauses to reload. That morning at 7 a.m., the sky was the color of a bruised plum, and the air smelled of wet pavement and ozone. I was sitting at my kitchen table nursing a mug of black coffee, trying to wash the bitter taste of the previous night out of my mouth. I had not slept well. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Brandon's face twisted with entitlement, screaming that I owed him. I owed him nothing. I had given him life, and for 38 years I had subsidized it. That stopped yesterday. Or so I thought. I was just about to pour a second cup when the sound of a fist hammering against my front door shattered the morning silence. It was not a neighborly knock. It was not the Amazon delivery driver. It was the heavy, authoritative pound of law enforcement. Bam, bam, bam. My heart skipped a beat, not out of fear, but out of a sudden, sharp instinct that told me the war had arrived at my doorstep. I stood up my knees, popping, and walked down the hallway. Through the frosted glass of the front door, I could see the silhouette of a uniform. I opened the door. Standing on my porch with the rain dripping from the brim of his hat was a King County Sheriff deputy. He looked young, maybe 30, the same age Brandon was when I paid off his second credit card debt. He held a thick manila envelope in his hand, protected from the rain by a plastic sheet. "Douglas Bennett," he asked, his voice flat and professional. "I am Douglas Bennett," I replied, keeping my hand on the doorframe. "You are being served." He thrust the envelope toward me. I took it. It felt heavy, heavier than a stack of papers should feel. It felt like a brick. "Have a nice day, sir," the deputy said, touching the brim of his hat, before turning and walking back to his patrol car, parked right in front of my driveway. Its lights were not flashing, but its presence was loud enough. I looked across the street. The curtains in Mrs. Higgins' house twitched. I saw her gray head duck back behind the fabric. Within 10 minutes, the whole neighborhood would know that the police had visited Doug Bennett. In a quiet, working-class neighborhood like ours, that was a stain that did not wash out easily. My son knew that. He knew exactly how much I valued my privacy and my good name. This was calculated. This was the first shot. I closed the door and locked it. I walked back to the kitchen and sat down. I put on my reading glasses, my hands steady. I was not shaking anymore. The sadness I had felt at the restaurant was gone, replaced by a cold, clinical curiosity. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go. I slit the envelope open with a steak knife. I pulled out the stack of documents. It was 20 pages thick, stapled at the top. The cover page was standard legal formatting, but the words printed there made my stomach churn with a mix of disgust and disbelief. Superior Court of Washington for King County. Plaintiffs: Brandon Bennett and Vanessa Bennett. Defendant Douglas Bennett. Complaint for damages. I turned the page and started to read. The legal jargon was dense, but the accusations were crystal clear. They were suing me for $500,000 plus legal fees, plus interest, plus damages for emotional distress. $500,000. The exact amount they needed to cover Vanessa's theft, though the lawsuit did not mention that. Instead, it wove a fairy tale so detailed and so venomous that I almost admired the audacity of it. Count 1: breach of oral contract. I read the paragraph twice to make sure I was not hallucinating. The complaint stated that on June 12, 2014, the date I finalized the sale of Bennett Construction, I had held a celebration dinner at my home. It claimed that during this dinner, in the presence of witnesses, I had verbally entered into a binding agreement with Brandon. It alleged that I had promised him 10% of the net proceeds from the sale of the company as compensation for his years of strategic consulting and business development services. I lowered the paper and stared at the rain streaking the window. Strategic consulting. Business development. I remembered June 12, 2014 perfectly. I did not have a celebration dinner. I sat alone in this very kitchen with a bottle of scotch, staring at the check that represented 40 years of my life. I felt empty that night, not celebratory. And Brandon, he was not even in the state. He was in Las Vegas on a trip I had paid for because he claimed he needed to clear his head after getting fired from a bartending job. He had called me that night not to congratulate me, but to ask for another $500 because he had put everything on black and lost. I looked back at the document. They had witnesses, affidavits attached at the back. I flipped to the end. There were 2 sworn statements signed and notarized, one from Vanessa's father and one from her mother. They swore under penalty of perjury that they were present at this imaginary dinner and clearly heard me promise Brandon the money. They were lying. They were risking prison time to help their daughter steal my retirement. I went back to the complaint. Count 2: unjust enrichment. It claimed that my company's success in its final years was largely due to Brandon's unpaid labor and innovative ideas, and that by keeping the full sale amount, I was unjustly enriching myself at his expense. It was laughable. Brandon had visited my job sites maybe 5 times in his life, usually to ask for cash or to borrow a truck he never refueled. He could not tell the difference between a Phillips head and a flathead screwdriver. He called manual labor peasant work. And now he was claiming he built my empire. I turned to the final page. The demand. $500,000 payable immediately. I set the papers down on the table. The coffee in my mug had gone cold. The house was silent, but inside my head, it was deafening. This was not a tantrum. This was a shakedown. This was my son looking at his father and seeing nothing but a prey animal to be hunted and stripped. They thought this would break me. They thought the shame of the sheriff at my door, the pressure of a lawsuit, and the threat of a public legal battle would make me fold. They were banking on the idea that I was just a lonely old man who wanted his family back and would pay any price for peace. They were wrong. I stood up and walked to the window, watching the rain fall on my overgrown lawn. I did not feel fear. I did not feel the urge to call Brandon and beg him to stop. I felt a strange, icy clarity settling in my chest. It was the same feeling I used to get before a demolition job. You look at a building that has stood for years. You find its weak points. You plant the charges, and you bring it down in a cloud of dust. Brandon wanted to play pretend. He wanted to pretend he was a businessman. He wanted to pretend he was a victim. He wanted to pretend he had leverage. Fine. I would play too. But I wasn't going to play the victim. I walked to my study and opened the floor safe again. I took out the file labeled Taxes 2014. I found the receipts from that week in June. The flight confirmation to Las Vegas for Brandon Bennett. The credit card transaction for his hotel. The withdrawal slip for the cash transfer I sent him that night. I held the papers in my hand. They claimed he was at my dinner table negotiating a contract. I had proof he was at the Bellagio losing my money. I looked at the phone. I could call them. I could scream. I could tell them I had proof. But that is what an amateur would do. That would give them time to change their story, to invent new lies. No, I would not call them. I would not warn them. I picked up the lawsuit and walked out the door into the rain. I got into my car and drove toward downtown Seattle. I was going to see the only man in this city who hated liars more than I did. I was going to see Jonathan Mitchell, and I wasn't going to ask him to defend me. I was going to ask him to help me load the cannon. As I drove, the windshield wipers kept time with my thoughts. Breach of contract, unjust enrichment, $500,000. My son didn't want an inheritance. He wanted a war. Well, he was about to find out that his father didn't just build skyscrapers. I knew how to bury things too, and I was going to bury this lawsuit so deep they would need a mining permit to find it. The cold anger in my gut was not burning out. It was freezing over, turning into a weapon. I wasn't Doug the dad anymore. I was the defendant, and the defendant pleaded not guilty. The elevator to the 42nd floor of the Columbia Center moved so smoothly it felt like standing still while the world dropped away beneath my feet. I watched the numbers climb in silence. My reflection in the polished brass doors looked back at me. I was wearing my charcoal suit, the one I usually saved for funerals and weddings. Today it felt appropriate for both. I was here to bury the relationship with my son and marry my fate to a legal strategy that would likely leave casualties. When the doors slid open, I stepped into a lobby that smelled of old money and aggressive air conditioning. The reception desk was a slab of marble that probably cost more than my first house. The receptionist, a young woman with a headset, looked up and smiled a professional smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "Mr. Mitchell is expecting you. Go right back." I walked down the hallway past glass-walled conference rooms where men in ties gestured at whiteboards. This was the engine room of Seattle. This was where fortunes were protected and lives were dismantled on letterhead stationery. I wasn't intimidated. I had built the foundations for buildings just like this. I knew that underneath the marble and the mahogany, it was all just steel and concrete holding up the weight. Jonathan Mitchell was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out at the gray expanse of Elliott Bay. The ferries looked like toys moving sluggishly across the water. Jonathan didn't turn when I walked in. He just kept watching the city. "It looks peaceful from up here, doesn't it, Doug?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "You can't see the dirt. You can't hear the noise. You can just pretend it all works perfectly." He turned around. He was a man of 55 with silver hair cut close to his scalp and eyes that were 2 shades darker than gunmetal. He wasn't smiling. Jonathan didn't smile when he was working. He was a shark in a bespoke Italian suit, and I was the only client he still took personal meetings for, because I was the only client who had never lied to him. I sat down in one of the leather chairs facing his desk. I didn't say hello. I just reached into my briefcase and pulled out the thick packet of papers the sheriff had handed me that morning. I dropped it on his desk. The thud was heavy and final. "They did it, Jonathan," I said. He sat down and pulled the documents toward him. He put on a pair of rimless glasses and started to read. The room was silent except for the sound of pages turning and the soft hum of the ventilation. I watched his face. I was looking for shock. I was looking for outrage. But Jonathan just read with the cold detachment of a surgeon examining an X-ray of a terminal tumor. After 10 minutes, he closed the folder and took off his glasses. He leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers. "Breach of oral contract," he said flatly. "Unjust enrichment. Intentional infliction of emotional distress." He looked at me. "It is a work of fiction, Doug, but it is a dangerous one." "I know," I said. "They have witnesses. Vanessa's parents." Jonathan waved a hand dismissively. "Witnesses can be broken. That is not what worries me. What worries me is the number, $500,000. Why, I asked. "Because it is specific," Jonathan said. "It isn't 1 million, it isn't 10 million, it is exactly $500,000. When people sue for greed, they usually swing for the fences. They ask for the moon and settle for a rock. But this feels precise. This feels like a debt." He stood up and walked over to a sidebar, pouring 2 glasses of sparkling water. He handed one to me. "Doug, we have been friends for a long time. You built my first house. I helped you sell your company for enough money to live like a king for 3 lifetimes. So I am going to ask you a question, and I need you to answer it not as a father, but as a client." He sat on the edge of his desk, looking down at me. "What do you want to do?" I looked at the water in my glass. "What do you mean?" "I mean, there are 2 ways to handle this," Jonathan said. "Option A is the shield. We file a motion to dismiss. We depose the witnesses. We drag this out for 2 years. We show the court that Brandon was in Las Vegas. We win eventually, but it will be messy. It will be public. And at the end of it, your son will still be your son, just a poorer and angrier version of himself. He might even get a nuisance settlement just to make him go away." I tightened my grip on the glass. "And option B?" Jonathan's eyes hardened. "Option B is the sword. We don't just defend, we attack. We find out why they need this money. We find out what they are hiding. We don't just prove they are lying, we prove they are criminals. We destroy their credibility, their finances, and their future. We make sure they are so busy fighting to stay out of prison that they never even think about suing you again." He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "Option B is scorched earth, Doug. We burn the fields so they can never harvest again. But if we do this, there is no coming back. You won't have a son anymore. You will have a defendant. And when we are done, he might be a felon." The room went quiet again. I looked out the window at the gray sky. I thought about the little boy I taught to ride a bike. I thought about the teenager I bailed out of jail. I thought about the man who sat across from me in a restaurant 2 nights ago and looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred because I wouldn't fund his lifestyle. He killed that boy, I thought. Brandon killed the son I loved the moment he decided to extort me. I looked up at Jonathan. My chest felt hollow, but my mind was clear. I don't want a settlement, Jonathan. I don't want to drag this out. They came into my house. They threatened me. They tried to use the law to rob me. I stood up and walked to the window, standing next to him. I want option B. I want scorched earth. I want them to have no road home. I want to destroy them, Jonathan. Not just beat them. Destroy them. Jonathan nodded slowly. He didn't look surprised. He looked satisfied. "Good," he said, walking back to his desk and hitting a button on his intercom. "Sarah, get Chen on the line. And clear my schedule for the afternoon." He looked back at me. "Sit down, Doug. If we are going to do this, we need to start digging." He pulled a fresh legal pad from his drawer and uncapped a pen. "Here is the strategy," Jonathan said, his voice sharp and precise. "We are not going to argue about the oral contract. That is a distraction. That is what they want us to focus on. They want us arguing about who said what at a dinner party 10 years ago. We are going to ignore that. We are going to focus on the money," I said, catching on. "Exactly," Jonathan said. "Why do they need $500,000 immediately? Why did they try to rush a mortgage on $1 million home when Brandon is unemployed? Why are Vanessa's parents willing to perjure themselves?" He wrote 3 words on the pad in bold letters. "Follow the money. I am going to subpoena their financial records," Jonathan continued. "Not just for this lawsuit. I am going to request discovery on everything. Bank accounts, credit cards, tax returns, investment portfolios. If they claim unjust enrichment, I have the right to examine their financial standing to prove context. They will fight that," I said. "They will say it is irrelevant." "Let them fight," Jonathan said, smiling that shark smile again. "If they fight, it means they are hiding something. And while they are fighting the subpoenas, I am going to have Chen turn their lives inside out. Chen is a forensic accountant and a private investigator. If Vanessa has bought a cup of coffee in the last 5 years, Chen will know where and how much she tipped." He looked at me over his glasses. "Vanessa works in finance, right?" "Yes," I said. "She is an internal auditor." "Interesting," Jonathan mused. "An auditor who needs fast cash. That is a dangerous combination. If she is cooking the books at work or if she has debt she is hiding, we will find it. And if we find it, we don't just use it in this civil case. We hand it to the district attorney. We hand it to her employer. We hand it to the IRS." I felt a cold shiver go down my spine. This was it. This was the red button. "Do it," I said. Jonathan wrote something else on the pad. "Tax returns. You mentioned Brandon's gambling debt," Jonathan said. "Did he declare any winnings? Did you file a gift tax return when you paid it off?" "I paid the bookies directly." "Cash." Jonathan nodded. "Good. That means Brandon likely has undeclared income, or at least unexplained lifestyle assets. We are going to audit him, Doug. We are going to compare what he told the IRS with what he is telling the court. In his lawsuit, he claims he worked for you as a consultant. I bet my license that on his tax returns from that year, he checked the box for unemployed to get benefits." "He did," I said, realizing the trap. "He was on unemployment for 6 months that year." Jonathan slammed his hand on the desk. "Got him. That is perjury. That is fraud. If he swears to this court he was working while swearing to the government he wasn't, he is done. We catch him in a lie on the stand, and his credibility evaporates. The judge will throw the case out and likely refer him for prosecution. It felt ruthless. It felt mechanical. It felt perfect. What do I need to do? I asked. You need to play the part, Jonathan said. You need to be the scared old man. Let them think they are winning. Let them think you are overwhelmed. Don't answer their calls, but don't block them either. Let them leave voicemails. Let them send texts. Every threat they make, every angry outburst is evidence. We are building a file, Doug. We are letting them hand us the rope they will use to hang themselves. He stood up and walked over to me, extending his hand. We are going to start the paperwork today. By tomorrow morning, Chen will be running their credit reports. By next week, we will know what they had for breakfast 3 years ago. I shook his hand. His grip was firm. Thank you, Jonathan, I said. Don't thank me yet, he replied. This is going to get ugly. Your daughter-in-law, Vanessa, she is the smart one, isn't she? Brandon is the noise, but she is the architect. Yes, I said. She is the one who handed me the pen. Then she is the one we have to watch, Jonathan said. If she senses the trap, she might run. Or she might get dangerous. Lock your doors, Doug. Get a security system. People who are desperate enough to sue their own family are desperate enough to do anything. I walked out of his office feeling different than when I walked in. I wasn't just a defendant anymore. I was a hunter. The elevator ride down felt faster. The city below looked different. It wasn't just buildings and rain. It was a grid, a system of rules and consequences. Brandon and Vanessa thought they could break the rules. They thought they were the predators. They had no idea that they had just walked into a cage with a lion. I got into my car and drove home. I didn't turn on the radio. I was thinking about Jonathan's question. Do you want to destroy them? Yes. I did. Because they didn't just want my money. They wanted my dignity. They wanted to strip me bare and leave me with nothing just to feed their own vanity. I pulled into my driveway. The rain had stopped. The house looked dark and quiet. I walked inside and went straight to the kitchen. I poured a glass of water. My hand was steady. My phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Brandon. Last chance, Dad. Settle this or we take everything. I looked at the message. I didn't feel anger. I felt pity. He was holding a water pistol and threatening a man driving a tank. I put the phone down and didn't reply. The silence in the house wasn't heavy anymore. It was the silence of a deep breath before the plunge. The war had started, and I was ready to burn it all down. 2 days later, my phone rang at 8:15 in the morning. It was Jonathan Mitchell. His voice was tight-clipped and completely devoid of the usual morning pleasantries. Doug, he said, get down here. Now. Don't finish your coffee. Don't read the paper. Just get in your car. I didn't ask why. I heard the tone. It was the tone of a foreman who just found a crack in the main support beam. I grabbed my keys and drove to the city. The rain had let up, leaving Seattle in a gray wash of low clouds and wet pavement. I drove fast, my mind racing through the possibilities. Did they find something on me? Had I made a mistake on a tax return 20 years ago? Paranoia is the first tax you pay when you enter a legal war. When I arrived at the 42nd floor, the receptionist didn't even ask me to sit. She waved me straight back. Jonathan's office door was closed. I knocked once and entered. Jonathan was standing behind his desk, his jacket off his sleeves rolled up. Sitting in one of the leather chairs was Chen, the private investigator. Chen was a small man with glasses that seemed too big for his face and a stillness that was unsettling. He looked like an accountant who had seen too many dead bodies. On the desk between them sat a single thin blue file folder. Sit down, Doug, Jonathan said. I sat. The air in the room was heavy, charged with static. We found it, Jonathan said. We know why. I looked at the folder. Why they need the money, I asked. Why they are desperate, Chen corrected. His voice was soft, almost a whisper, but it carried across the room perfectly. It isn't about lifestyle, Doug. It isn't about greed. It is about survival. Chen opened the folder. He spun it around so I could see the documents. The first page was a corporate profile for a company called Sterling Capital. Vanessa works here, Chen said. She is a senior internal auditor. Her job is to find financial discrepancies, to catch mistakes, to stop theft. I nodded. I knew this. Vanessa always bragged about her job, about how important she was, how she kept the company honest. 6 months ago, Chen continued, she found a loophole in their vendor payment system, a legacy glitch in the software that allowed payments under $5,000 to be processed without secondary authorization if they were tagged as maintenance expenses. I looked up at Chen. She didn't report it, Chen said. She exploited it. He flipped the page. A spreadsheet. Columns of numbers, dates, and amounts. Start date February 4th. End date last Tuesday. Total amount embezzled $312,000. My breath caught in my throat. 300,000. She set up 3 shell companies, Chen explained. Fake vendors. She has been approving invoices for non-existent IT repairs and office supplies. The money goes into accounts she controls. I stared at the numbers. They were small amounts. 4,000 here, 3,000 there. But there were dozens of them. It was a slow bleed. But here's the problem, Jonathan interrupted. Sterling Capital was just acquired by a larger banking group. As part of the merger, they are conducting a full external audit, a forensic audit. It starts on the 1st of the month. I looked at the calendar on the wall. That was 10 days away. She is going to get caught, I said. She knows, Chen said. That is why she needs the money. She needs to pay back the $300,000 plus interest before the external auditors open the books. If the money is back in the account, she can claim it was an accounting error, a glitch she was fixing. She might get fired for incompetence, but she won't go to prison. If the money isn't there, Jonathan said, leaning forward, she goes to federal prison for wire fraud and embezzlement. 10 years minimum. The pieces slammed together in my mind like a car crash. The dinner, the mortgage, the house, I said. The house in Bellevue. Exactly, Jonathan said. It was never about living there. It was a financial vehicle. Think about the timing, Doug. She finds out about the audit 2 weeks ago. She panics. She needs $300,000 fast. She can't get a personal loan that size with her credit score, not without raising flags. So she buys a house, I said, working it out. A $1.2 million asset. Right, Jonathan said. But she needs a down payment to close the deal. $240,000. That is where you came in. If you signed the mortgage and paid the down payment, the house closes. The asset is hers. And then I said, realizing the next step. And then Chen finished, she opens a HELOC immediately. A home equity line of credit. With $1 million property and a solid co-signer like you, the bank would give her access to $300,000 or $400,000 in cash within days. She draws down the equity, takes the cash, pays back Sterling Capital, and hopes the auditors don't look too closely at the timestamps. It was brilliant in a sick, desperate way. She was going to use my money to buy a house so she could use the house to pay back the money she stole. But I said no, I whispered. And that is why they screamed at you, Jonathan said. That is why Brandon looked like he was going to kill you. You didn't just deny them a luxury home. You closed the only escape hatch they had. Without the house, there is no HELOC. Without the HELOC, there is no cash. So now they are suing me, I said. Plan B, Jonathan said. If they can't get the money from the bank via the house, they have to get it directly from you via the lawsuit. $500,000. Enough to cover the theft, the taxes on the settlement, and the legal fees. I sat back in the chair, feeling physically ill. My daughter-in-law wasn't just a spoiled brat. She was a felon in waiting, and she was trying to turn me into her accomplice. "Does Brandon know?" I asked. The question hung in the air. I desperately wanted the answer to be no. I wanted my son to be a fool, not a criminal. Chen didn't speak. He just slid another piece of paper across the desk. It was a bank signature card for one of the shell companies used to launder the stolen money. At the bottom, in familiar scrawling ink, was the signature of the treasurer, Brandon Bennett. I closed my eyes. The room felt very small. My son. My boy. He wasn't just aware of it. He was part of it. He was helping her steal. He was helping her hide it. And now he was helping her hunt his own father to cover their tracks. "He is terrified," Doug Jonathan said, his voice softer now. "I suspect Vanessa drove this. She is the auditor. She knew the system. Brandon just went along because he is weak and he likes the money. But now they are trapped in a room with a ticking bomb. They are suing you, not because they want to, but because they have to. It is the only way out." I opened my eyes. I looked at the file. The evidence was all there. The transfers, the dates, the signatures. It was a map of their destruction. "So what do we do?" I asked. My voice sounded hollow. "Do we call the police? Do we hand this to the FBI?" Chen looked at Jonathan. Jonathan looked at Miwoo. "We could," Jonathan said. "We could walk this over to the U.S. Attorney's Office right now. They would have warrants by dinner. Brandon and Vanessa would be in custody by morning." I thought about it. I thought about Brandon in handcuffs. I thought about the shame. But Jonathan continued. "If we do that, the lawsuit stays active for a while. It becomes a mess. And frankly, Doug, you lose the satisfaction of looking them in the eye when they realize they lost." "What do you suggest?" I asked. "We hold it," Jonathan said. "We keep this file. We let them think they are winning. We let them walk into that courtroom. We let them lie on the record. We let them commit perjury. We let them testify that they are honest, hard-working people who were wronged by a greedy father." And then I said, the anger starting to burn through the sickness. And then Jonathan smiled a smile that was all teeth. "We dropped the hammer. We don't just win the lawsuit. We hand-deliver them to justice in the most public, undeniable way possible. We let the judge see this. We let the judge ask the question." I looked at the signature card again. Brandon Bennett, treasurer. He had signed his name to a crime. He had signed his name to my destruction. "Do it," I said. Jonathan nodded to Chen. "Keep digging. I want to know where every cent went. I want to know if they bought cars, clothes, vacations. I want to be able to show the jury exactly what my client's son considers consulting work." Chen gathered the papers. "One more thing, Mr. Bennett." "Yes, Vanessa made a call yesterday," Chen said, "to a travel agent. She asked about flights to countries with no extradition treaties. She is getting ready to run." "She won't get far," Jonathan said. "Not without the money." I stood up. My legs felt heavy, but my resolve was harder than concrete. "They aren't going anywhere," I said. "They are going to court." I left the office and walked out into the city. The noise of the traffic seemed distant. I was walking through a different world now. A world where my son was a criminal and I was the only thing standing between him and a cell. Or maybe I was the one who was going to put him there. I realized then that the lawsuit wasn't an attack. It was a hostage negotiation. They were holding my reputation hostage and demanding a ransom. But they didn't know I had already seen the hostage dead. They didn't know I had nothing left to lose. I got into my car and locked the doors. I looked at my phone. There was a missed call from Brandon. No voicemail. Just a silent electronic footprint of his panic. I started the engine. I wasn't going to call him back. I wasn't going to save him. Not this time. He wanted to be an adult. He wanted to make big decisions. Well, he had made them. Now he was going to learn that in the real world, when you steal from the wrong people, you don't get a timeout. You get taken down. And I was the demolition man. The war did not stay in the lawyer's office. It followed me home. It bled into my phone and it seeped into the neighborhood. Jonathan had warned me that they would try to break me psychologically before we ever stepped foot in a courtroom, and he was right. They did not want a trial. They wanted me to collapse under the weight of shame so they could pick my pockets while I was down. It started on a Tuesday evening. I was sitting in my living room reading a book about naval history, trying to keep my mind off the looming deposition. My phone lit up on the side table. It was not a call. It was a notification from Facebook. I hadn't used the app in years, mostly just to look at photos of my old army buddies, but I kept it installed. You have been tagged in a post by Vanessa Bennett. I opened it. My stomach turned over. It was a photo of Brandon and Vanessa looking haggard and tearful. They were sitting on a couch I didn't recognize, probably at her parents' house. The caption was a masterpiece of fiction. "It breaks our hearts to make this public," Vanessa wrote. "We have tried to handle this privately, with love and respect, but we have been pushed to the breaking point. We are about to lose our home because Brandon's father, Douglas Bennett, has decided to renege on a promise he made 10 years ago. A promise to share the family wealth that Brandon helped build. Instead, he has chosen to watch his only son struggle while he sits on millions. We are not asking for charity. We are asking for justice. Please pray for us as we fight for what is right against a man who has lost his way." Below the text were hashtags: elder abuse, broken promises, family, betrayal. I watched the comments roll in real time. People I had known for 30 years, people I had built fences for, people I had loaned tools to were reacting with sad faces and angry emojis. "I cannot believe Doug would do this," one neighbor wrote. "He always seemed so nice. You never know what goes on behind closed doors." "Stay strong, Vanessa," another commented. "The truth will come out. Shame on him." I sat there in the blue light of the screen, feeling the walls closing in. They were painting me as a senile tyrant. They were isolating me. It is a classic predator tactic. Separate the prey from the herd. Make them feel alone. Make them feel like the only way to stop the pain is to surrender. Then the calls started. My sister-in-law, Ruth, my late wife's sister. We hadn't spoken much since Mary died, but she called me at 9 p.m. "Doug," she said, her voice shrill, "I just saw Vanessa's post. Is it true? Are you really letting them starve?" "They are not starving, Ruth," I said, keeping my voice calm. "They are living in a condo and driving BMWs." "Don't lie to me, Doug," she snapped. "Vanessa said you promised him that money. She said you are hoarding it. Mary would be ashamed of you." That hit me hard. "Mary." "Ruth," I said firmly, "you don't know what is happening. You don't know what they have done." "I know that family helps family," she yelled. "Fix this, Doug, or don't bother coming to the family reunion next month." She hung up. I put the phone down. My hand was shaking. Not from fear, but from a rage so cold, it felt like ice in my veins. They were using Mary against me. They were using the memory of the woman I loved to extort me. I didn't reply to the post. I didn't call Ruth back. I remembered Jonathan's orders. Be the victim. Let them dig. I took screenshots of everything. The post, the comments, the timestamps. I forwarded them to Chen. "File it," I typed. Harassment. 2 nights later, the digital war turned physical. It was raining again, a heavy sheet of water that drummed against the roof. I was in the kitchen making a sandwich when I saw headlights sweep across the front window. A car had pulled into my driveway, not parked on the street. pulled right up to the garage door, aggressive and close. I checked the security monitor Jonathan had made me install. It was Brandon's car. I didn't turn on the porch light. I didn't unlock the door. I walked to the hallway and stood in the shadows. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the digital recorder I now carried everywhere. I pressed record. The pounding started. It wasn't a knock. It was fists hammering against the wood. Dad, Brandon screamed, "I know you are in there." Open the door. I stood perfectly still. Doug. It was Vanessa. Her voice was screeching, cutting through the sound of the rain. "Open this door right now, you can't hide from us." They pounded for 5 minutes straight. They kicked the door. I could hear the wood frame groaning. If they broke it down, I would have to defend myself. I had a baseball bat in the closet, but I didn't want to use it. I wanted them to hang themselves with their own words. "Come out, you coward," Brandon yelled. "You think you are tough, you are nothing. You are a lonely, pathetic old man. Give us the money." I moved closer to the door, holding the recorder up. "We know you are talking to lawyers," Vanessa shouted. "We know you are investigating us. You better stop, Doug. You better stop right now, or we will make sure everyone knows about you. We will tell them you are crazy. We will tell them you hit me." I froze. That was a threat. A specific malicious threat to fabricate a crime. "Did you hear that, Brandon?" She screamed at the door. "I am going to tell the police he hit me. I will ruin him." She was losing control. The pressure of the impending audit, the stolen money, the fear of prison, it was making her sloppy. She was screaming her conspiracy for the whole neighborhood to hear. And for my recorder. I didn't say a word. I just listened. And as I stood there in the dark, listening to my son curse my name, my mind drifted back. It went back 5 years to a hospital room at Swedish Medical Center. It was the night Mary died. It was cancer, slow and painful. We had been there for 3 days, sleeping in chairs, watching her fade. She had finally slipped into a coma around midnight. The doctors said it was a matter of hours. I was holding her hand. Her skin was paper-thin and cold. I was crying silently, trying to memorize the lines of her face, trying to say goodbye to the only person who truly knew me. The door had opened. It was Brandon. He walked in smelling of stale beer and cigarettes. He looked at his mother lying there dying, and he didn't cry. He didn't come to her side. He stood at the foot of the bed and looked at me. "Dad," he said. I looked up, my eyes blurry with tears. "Son, she is going." "Yeah," Brandon said, shifting his weight. "Listen, Dad. I need to ask you something." Now I asked. "Yeah, now. Before, before she goes." He licked his lips. "Did she sign the life insurance papers?" "The new policy," I stared at him. My wife, his mother, was taking her last breaths, and he was asking about the payout. What I whispered. "The policy," Brandon said, his voice annoyed. "The one for 200,000. Did she sign it?" "Is it active? Because I have some debts, Dad. And when this pays out, I am going to need my share." I stood up that night. I let go of Mary's hand for the first time in 3 days. I walked over to my son. I was 64 years old, but I grabbed him by the collar of his jacket and I shoved him against the wall of the hospital room. "Get out," I hissed. "Get out before I kill you." He looked surprised. "Jesus, Dad. I am just being practical." "Get out," he left. Mary died an hour later. Just me and her. Brandon never came back to say goodbye. He came back the next week for the funeral, asking if the check had arrived yet. I came back to the present. The pounding on the door had stopped. The rain was the only sound now. I checked the monitor. They were walking back to the car. Vanessa was gesturing wildly, screaming at Brandon. Brandon kicked the tire of his car. They looked like what they were. Desperate, dangerous animals trapped in a corner. They got in the car and backed out, tires spinning on the wet asphalt, leaving black marks on my driveway. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it Harassment and Threats, Nov 12. I walked back to the kitchen. My heart was beating slow and hard. The sadness I had felt for years, the guilt I had carried thinking I had failed as a father, it was gone. Evaporated. That night in the hospital, I had seen who Brandon really was. I had seen the emptiness inside him. I had spent 5 years trying to ignore it, trying to buy his love, trying to fix him with money. But you cannot fill a black hole. You can only fall into it. Tonight, listening to them threaten to frame me for assault, I finally accepted it. My son was not a victim of a bad wife. He was not a good kid who lost his way. He was a partner in the firm. He was just as rotten as she was. I poured the rest of my water into the sink. I picked up my phone and sent the audio file to Jonathan. I added a text message. They were here. They threatened to frame me. I have it all on tape. Add it to the pile. Jonathan replied instantly. Got it. This is gold, Doug. This goes to the judge. Stay inside. Lock the doors. We are close. I locked the phone. I looked around my empty, quiet house. They thought they were terrorizing me. They thought they were making me weak. But all they were doing was reminding me why I had to finish this. They had insulted my wife's memory. They had threatened my freedom. And they had underestimated my resolve. I went to the window and watched the street. The rain was washing away the tire marks, but it wouldn't wash away what happened tonight. Let them post on Facebook. Let them call my relatives. Let them scream at the door. Every word they said was another nail in their coffin. I was done enduring. I was done waiting. Tomorrow we would file the response. Tomorrow we would unleash the subpoenas. And soon, very soon, I would look Brandon in the eye, not as his father, but as the man who was going to take everything he thought he was entitled to and leave him with nothing but his own choices. I turned off the lights and went to bed. For the first time in a week that I slept like a baby. I knew exactly what I had to do, and I knew I was going to win. The sun finally broke through the clouds on Friday morning, but it brought no warmth to my house in Ballard. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where I had fed Brandon breakfast for 18 years, and stared at my phone. It was a black rectangle of glass and plastic, but in my hands it felt like a detonator. Jonathan Mitchell had given me the green light at 8 a.m. He sent a text that consisted of 2 words. Do it. I took a deep breath. I closed my eyes and pictured the man my son wanted me to be. He wanted a frail, confused old pensioner. He wanted a man whose spirit had been broken by public shaming and late-night screaming matches. He wanted a victim. I exhaled slowly, letting my shoulders slump forward. I relaxed my jaw, letting my face sag. I coughed a dry, rattling cough just to get the timbre right. I was not an actor, I was a contractor. But today I had to build a performance that would hold up under the weight of $500,000. I dialed Brandon's number. It rang 4 times. He was making me wait. It was a power play. Finally, he answered. What do you want? He snapped. There was no hello, just the aggression of a man who thinks he holds the whip. I let a moment of silence hang in the air. I let my breath hitch audibly. Brandon, I said, my voice trembling just enough. It is Dad. I know who it is, he said. I have caller ID. If you aren't calling to tell me you signed the check, I am hanging up. Wait, son, please, I said, pitching my voice higher, weaker. I can't take this anymore. The silence on his end changed. It wasn't impatient anymore. It was attentive. The predator smelled blood. What do you mean? He asked. The neighbors, I said, injecting a note of panic into my tone. Mrs. Higgins won't look at me. People are posting things online. And the other night when you came over, I was scared, Brandon. I am old. I don't want to fight with my family. I don't want to die alone in this house with everyone hating me. I paused, waiting. I needed him to buy it. I needed his ego to override his suspicion. Well, Dad, Brandon said, his voice softening into that patronizing tone that was almost worse than the yelling. We told you this would happen. You brought this on yourself. You were being stubborn. I know, I said. I know. I want it to stop. I want to see my granddaughter again. You can see her when you fix this, he said. I took a shaky breath. Okay. You win. I want to settle. There it was. The surrender. I could almost hear him smiling through the phone. I could imagine him signaling to Vanessa, giving her a thumbs up. You want to settle? He repeated, savoring the words. Does that mean the full amount? 500,000. Yes, I said. But I can't. I can't do it over the phone. I need to see you. I need to make sure this ends it. I need to know you won't ask for more. We can meet, Brandon said quickly. Today. Come to my lawyer's office. Alvarez. You know where it is. I hesitated, playing the part. I don't like lawyers, son. Can't we just meet at the house? No, Brandon said sharply. We do this officially. We sign the papers, you hand over the check, and then we drop the lawsuit. Noon. Don't be late. And Dad, yes. Don't bring that shark Mitchell. If I see him, I am walking out, and we are going back to Facebook. I won't, I lied. I will come alone. Just me. Good. See you at noon. He hung up. I lowered the phone and straightened my back. The old man vanished. The tremor in my hands stopped. I walked to the sink and drank a glass of water. My eyes fixed on the clock on the wall. It was 9:30. I had 2 hours to prepare for the most important meeting of my life. I went to the bedroom and opened the bottom drawer of my dresser. Underneath a stack of winter socks was a small velvet pouch. I took it out. Inside was a digital recorder no bigger than a pack of gum. It was high-tech, something Chen, the investigator, had couriered over the night before. It has a 12-hour battery life, Chen had told me. It picks up a whisper from across the room. Just don't put it near your keys or your change. The clinking ruins the audio. I pressed the small button on the side. A tiny red light blinked once, then vanished. It was recording. Testing 1, 2, 3, I said to the empty room. Brandon Bennett is a thief. I played it back. My voice was crystal clear. I put on my clothes. I didn't wear a suit. A suit implies business. A suit implies power. I put on a pair of tan slacks that were slightly too loose, and a beige cardigan that Mary had bought me 10 years ago. It had a small coffee stain near the hem. I looked in the mirror. I looked harmless. I looked like a grandfather who feeds ducks in the park and forgets where he parked his car. I slipped the recorder into the inside pocket of the cardigan. I taped it down with a strip of electrical tape so it wouldn't slide or fall out if I moved too quickly. I checked the profile in the mirror. Invisible. Then I went to my desk. I took out my checkbook. I wrote a check. Pay to the order of Brandon Bennett. Amount $500,000 and 00-100. I signed it. My hand didn't shake. This check was the bait. It was the piece of cheese in the mousetrap. I knew they would never cash it. I knew that by the time they tried, I would have destroyed them. But they needed to see it. They needed to smell the money to lose their minds. I put the check in my wallet. My phone rang again. It was Jonathan. Are you ready, Doug? I am ready, I said. Remember, Jonathan said, his voice intense. You are not there to argue. You are not there to defend yourself. You are there to get them to admit two things. One, that there was no oral contract. 2, that they are demanding this money as a gift. If you get that on tape, the IRS handles the rest. And Doug. Yeah, if Vanessa gets close, be careful. She's cornered. I will be fine, I said. I hung up. I walked to the front door. I looked at the umbrella stand where Mary's old walking cane still sat gathering dust. I hadn't touched it in 5 years. I picked it up. It felt light in my hand. I didn't need a cane. My legs were strong. But Doug, the defeated father, needed a cane. I stepped out onto the porch. The rain had started again, a light drizzle that misted my glasses. I locked the door behind me. As I walked to my car, leaning heavily on the cane, I thought about the first time I held Brandon. He was so small. I promised him I would protect him from the world. I promised him I would teach him to be a good man. I failed at the second part. But today I was going to keep the first promise in a way he would never understand. I was going to stop him from getting away with a crime that would ruin his soul forever. I was going to stop him by taking everything away. I got into the car. I placed the cane on the passenger seat. I patted the pocket with the recorder. "Showtime," I whispered. I started the engine and drove toward the strip mall where Alvarez had his office. I drove slowly under the speed limit, letting cars pass me honking. Let them honk. Let them think I was slow. Let them underestimate me. I was driving into the lion's den, but the lions didn't know that the man walking in wasn't meat. He was poison. The law office of Peter Alvarez was wedged between a vape shop and a payday loan center in a strip mall that had seen better decades. The asphalt in the parking lot was cracked like a dry riverbed, and the sign above the door was missing the letter Z. It was fitting, I thought. My son was trying to sell his soul, and he had brought it to a pawn shop. I parked my car away from the other vehicles, a black BMW that belonged to Brandon, and a red Mercedes that I knew Vanessa had leased 3 months ago. They were parked aggressively, taking up 2 spots each, as if to claim dominion over this patch of concrete wasteland. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment, listening to the engine cool. My hand went to my chest, pressing against the beige cardigan to feel the hard plastic rectangle of the digital recorder. It was there. It was running. I picked up Mary's cane from the passenger seat. I opened the door and stepped out, hunching my shoulders, dropping my head. I shuffled toward the tinted glass door, my steps heavy and slow. I was not Douglas Bennett, the man who built skyscrapers. I was Doug, the defeated father. I was the prey walking into the cave. The waiting room smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The carpet was a shade of industrial gray that hid stains, but not where, and the magazines on the table were 3 years old. There was no receptionist, just a closed door with a nameplate that hung slightly crooked. I could hear voices inside, angry, urgent whispers. I knocked. The voices stopped instantly. "Come in," a voice shouted. It was Brandon. He didn't sound welcoming. He sounded like a man whose nerves were vibrating like a high-tension wire. I opened the door and stepped inside, leaning heavily on the cane. The office was small, cramped with filing cabinets that wouldn't close properly. Behind a laminate desk sat a man who had to be Alvarez. He wore a suit that was too shiny and a tie that was too wide. He looked like he made his living chasing ambulances and drafting wills for people who owned nothing. Sitting across from him were Brandon and Vanessa. They turned as I entered. Vanessa looked like a queen forced to hold court in a sewer. She was wearing a white blazer and gold jewelry, her face set in a mask of haughty triumph. But underneath the makeup, I saw the tension. Her eyes were darting. Her hands were clenched in her lap. She was terrified. Brandon looked worse. He was pale, sweating despite the air conditioning. He looked at me, and for a second I saw shame. But then he looked at Vanessa, and the shame hardened into resentment. "You are late," Vanessa snapped, not bothering with a hello. "I am on time," I said, my voice raspy and weak. "I drive slow these days." My eyes aren't what they used to be. Sit down, Alvarez said, gesturing to a folding metal chair. Mr. Bennett, I am Peter Alvarez, representing your son and daughter-in-law. I understand we are here to execute a settlement agreement. I sat down slowly, making a show of adjusting my bad leg. I placed the cane across my knees. I looked at Brandon. Hello, son, I said softly. Just get on with it, Dad. Brandon muttered, looking at the floor. Alvarez cleared his throat. He pushed a document across the desk. It was thin, just 3 pages. This is a standard settlement and release, he said. By signing this, you agree to pay the plaintiffs $500,000 immediately. In exchange, they agree to dismiss the lawsuit with prejudice. This means they cannot sue you again for this specific claim. It also includes a non-disclosure agreement. No one talks about this. Ever. I looked at the paper. It was a surrender. It was a confession of guilt I hadn't committed. I brought my checkbook, I said, reaching into my pocket with a trembling hand. Good, Vanessa said. Her eyes were locked on my hand. She looked like a shark smelling blood in the water. Write it now. A cashier's check would have been better, but we will take a personal check if we can verify funds immediately. I opened the checkbook. I took out a pen. I laid it flat on the messy desk. I looked at the amount line. $500,000. It was a fortune. It was enough to put a kid through college 10 times over. It was enough to retire in luxury, and they wanted it to cover up a theft. I hesitated. I let the pen hover over the paper. I let my hand shake just a little more. Vanessa let out a sharp breath. What is the problem, Doug? Sign it. I looked up at Alvarez. I looked at Brandon. I let confusion cloud my face. There is just one thing, I said. My accountant. He told me I have to be careful. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Careful about what? You have the money. We know you do, taxes, I said quietly. The room went silent. Alvarez frowned. What about taxes, Well, I said, looking at Brandon pleadingly. In the lawsuit, you say this money is for work. You say it is for consulting. For a contract I made with you 10 years ago. Yeah, so Brandon said defensively. I earned it. I nodded slowly. I know, son. I know you think that. But if I write this check as payment for a contract, that is income. Isn't it? I looked at Alvarez. You are a lawyer. You know, if I pay a debt for services rendered, that is taxable income. Brandon will have to declare this on his taxes next year. Federal income tax, state taxes, self-employment tax since he was a consultant. I did the math in my head, letting them see me think. That is, what, 35%, maybe 40. So out of 500,000, the government takes almost 200,000. You only keep 300. I saw the color drain from Vanessa's face. 300,000 wasn't enough. The theft was 312,000 plus interest, plus the legal fees for this shark Alvarez. If they paid taxes, they would still be short. They would still go to prison. Vanessa looked at Brandon. Panic flared in her eyes. They hadn't thought about the taxes. They were so focused on the number they forgot the government always takes its cut. I don't care about taxes, Brandon snapped. Just give me the money. But son, I continued, my voice whining slightly. If I pay this as income, I have to file a 1099 form with the IRS. I have to report that I paid you. And since you didn't declare this income 10 years ago when you supposedly did the work, the IRS might audit you. They might wonder why you waited 10 years to get paid. The penalties could be huge. Alvarez looked uncomfortable. He loosened his tie. Mr. Bennett raises a valid point. If this is settlement for a contract breach, it is taxable. No. Vanessa slammed her hand on the desk. No audits. We can't have an audit. She stopped, realizing she had said too much. Alvarez looked at her sharply. Why can't you have an audit, Mrs. Bennett? She ignored him, turning her fury on me. You are trying to trick us. You are trying to wiggle out of it. I am not trying to trick anyone, I said, sounding hurt. I just want to help. I brought the money. Look, I started writing. 5, 0, 0. But I paused again. There is another way, I said softly. They all leaned in. It was magnetic. The pull of the solution. What way, Brandon asked. If this isn't for work, I said. If this isn't a contract payment. If I just give it to you. As a father. A gift, Alvarez asked. Yes, I said. A gift. Under federal law, I can give a gift. I pay the gift tax, not you. You get the full $500,000. Tax-free. No reporting. No 1099. No IRS looking at your accounts. I saw the relief wash over Brandon's face. It was pathetic. He didn't care about the lie. He didn't care about his dignity. He just wanted the cash cold and hard. Do that, he said quickly. Make it a gift. But son, I said, looking him right in the eye, my voice steadying just a fraction. If it is a gift, that means there was no contract. It means I never promised you anything 10 years ago. It means the lawsuit is, well, it isn't true. Brandon didn't hesitate. He didn't even look at Vanessa. He looked at the checkbook. Who cares, he said. Call it whatever you want. Call it a gift. Just sign the damn check. Vanessa interrupted. Wait. If we call it a gift, we have to drop the lawsuit first. Yes, I said. But I need to hear you say it. I need to know that we are clear. I am an old man. I don't want to be confused later. I looked at Vanessa. Is this a gift, Vanessa? Or do I owe you this money for a contract? She glared at me. She hated me in that moment more than she had ever hated anyone. But she loved her freedom more. She needed that tax-free cash to cover the hole in her company's ledger. It is a gift, she hissed through clenched teeth. There was no contract. We made it up to get your attention because you wouldn't help us. Are you happy you forced us to lie? Now give us the money as a gift. I looked at Brandon. And you, son, you admit there was no consulting work, no promise at dinner. It was a gift, Brandon said loud and clear. You owe it to me as a father, but legally, fine. It is a gift. There was no contract, I nodded slowly. I finished writing the check. I signed my name at the bottom. Douglas Bennett. I tore it out of the book with a satisfying rip. I held the check in my hand. Vanessa reached for it, her fingers hooked like talons. Alvarez was already uncapping his pen to sign the dismissal papers. Okay, so we are changing the settlement terms to a voluntary gift. I can draft that. I pulled the check back just an inch. So to be clear, I said one last time, you are admitting right now in front of your lawyer that the lawsuit you filed with the court is false, that you perjured yourselves in the complaint, and that you are demanding this money from me right now, or else you will continue to harass me. Just give me the check, Brandon yelled, jumping up. Yes, it was a lie. We needed the money. Stop torturing us and pay up. I sat there for 1 second longer. I felt the recorder against my ribs, warm and vibrating. I had it. I had the confession. I had the extortion. I had the admission of perjury. And I had the motive. I smiled. It wasn't the smile of a defeated father. It was the smile of the man who poured the foundation for the Columbia Center. It was a smile of steel. I let the check drop from my fingers. It fluttered to the desk, landing face up. Vanessa grabbed it. She actually snatched it up and pressed it to her chest, closing her eyes in relief. I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I left it leaning against the chair. I straightened my back, stretching to my full 6-foot height. The stoop was gone. The tremor was gone. Thank you, I said, my voice booming in the small office. Alvarez looked up, confused by the change in my tone. Mr. Bennett, thank you for confirming that there was no contract, I said. And thank you for admitting on tape that you are attempting to extort me. Vanessa's eyes snapped open. She looked at the check. Then she looked at me. I reached into my cardigan and ripped the tape holding the recorder. I pulled the small black device out and held it up. The red light was still blinking, steady and unblinking, like a robotic eye. I recorded everything I said, every word. You just admitted to filing a false lawsuit. You admitted to perjury, and you admitted to extortion. Brandon's face went the color of ash. Dad, what are you doing? I am not your dad right now, Brandon, I said, cold as the grave. I am the defendant, and I just won. I looked at Vanessa. And that check. You might want to look at the date. She looked down at the paper in her hands. She screamed. It was dated for the year 2050. You can cash that when I am dead, I said, which according to you should be any day now. But until then, it is a piece of paper, just like your lawsuit. Vanessa threw the check at me. You bastard! You old bastard! She lunged. She actually came over the desk, her nails aiming for my face. She was a wild animal, cornered and rabid. Vanessa, no, Alvarez shouted. He jumped up and grabbed her by the waist, hauling her back. She was kicking and screaming, spitting curses that would make a sailor blush. I stepped back calmly, brushing a speck of dust from my cardigan. I am leaving now, I said to Alvarez. I suggest you withdraw from this case, counselor. Unless you want to be named as a co-conspirator in the criminal charges I will be filing. Criminal charges. Alvarez choked out, struggling to hold Vanessa. Oh yes, I said, walking to the door. Extortion is a felony. Filing false court documents is a felony. And Brandon. I looked at my son, who was slumped in his chair, staring at the wall as if his life had just ended. I know about the audit at Sterling Capital, I said. I know about the $300,000 Vanessa stole. And I know you signed the checks for the shell company. Brandon looked at me and started to cry. Silent, terrifying sobs. I opened the door. See you in court, I said. I walked out of the office and into the parking lot. The rain had stopped. The air tasted sweet. I walked to my car without the cane. I left Mary's cane in that office. It belonged to the past. Behind me, I heard the muffled sounds of screaming from inside the office. It sounded like music. I got into my car and started the engine. My hands were steady. My heart was light. I pulled out my phone and called Jonathan. I got it, I said. They confessed. Everything. I could hear Jonathan's smile through the phone. Bring it to me, Doug. We have a judge to see. I drove away, leaving the BMW and the Mercedes behind. They looked smaller in my rearview mirror. Just expensive piles of metal owned by people who had already lost everything and just didn't know it yet. The trap was sprung. The steel jaws had snapped shut. Now all that was left was to skin them. The King County Superior Court smells of floor wax, old paper, and the nervous sweat of people who know they have done something wrong. Monday morning brought a gray light filtering through the high, narrow windows, casting long shadows across the mahogany benches. I sat at the defense table next to Jonathan Mitchell. I wore my charcoal suit again, but this time I wore it like armor. My hands were folded on the table, calm and still. I was not the agitated old man they expected. I was a statue. Across the aisle, Brandon and Vanessa sat with their lawyer, Alvarez. They looked like they hadn't slept in 3 days. Brandon was vibrating his leg, bouncing up and down under the table, shaking the water pitcher. Vanessa was pale, her makeup applied with a heavy hand to cover the dark circles under her eyes. She kept whispering to Alvarez, pulling at his sleeve. Alvarez looked like a man marching to the gallows. He had tried to withdraw from the case that morning, citing a breakdown in attorney-client communication, but Judge Harrison had denied the motion, stating that it was too late to delay the proceedings. So Alvarez was stuck. He was captaining a sinking ship, and he knew I was the iceberg. The bailiff called the court to order. All rise. Judge Harrison entered. He was a man in his 60s with a face carved from granite and eyes that had seen every lie a human being could invent. He sat down and looked over his spectacles at the two tables. Counsel opening statements. Alvarez stood up. He smoothed his tie, took a deep breath, and began to weave the fairy tale. He walked back and forth in front of the jury, gesturing wildly, trying to inject passion into a corpse of a case. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, he began, his voice pitching high. This is a case about a promise made by a father to a son, a promise that was broken not out of necessity, but out of spite. He pointed a finger at me. I didn't blink. I didn't look away. I just watched him. Douglas Bennett is a wealthy man, Alvarez continued. He built an empire. But he didn't do it alone. His son Brandon was there. Brandon offered guidance. Brandon offered modern strategies. And 10 years ago, when Mr. Bennett sold that empire for millions, he made a contract. He looked his son in the eye and said, "You have earned 10%. You have earned your share." I listened to the lies, and I felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, just a cold detachment. It was fascinating in a way to see how they had twisted my life into this grotesque parody. Brandon sat there nodding along, playing the part of the victimized prince. He truly believed it. That was the scariest part. He had told himself this lie so many times that it had become his truth. For 10 years, Alvarez said, dropping his voice to a whisper, Brandon waited. He didn't demand. He didn't nag. He trusted his father. But when he finally asked for what was his, Douglas Bennett laughed in his face. He used his wealth as a weapon. He decided to punish his son for daring to ask for what he was owed. This lawsuit is not about greed. It is about justice. It is about holding a man to his word. Alvarez sat down, wiping sweat from his forehead. He avoided looking at me. Jonathan stood up. He didn't walk around. He didn't point fingers. He stood behind his table, solid and immovable. The evidence will show, Jonathan said, his voice calm and resonant, that there was no contract, there was no work, and there was no promise. The evidence will show that this lawsuit is nothing more than a desperate attempt to extract money from a father who has already given too much. He sat down, short, brutal. Then came the witnesses. This was their ace in the hole. Vanessa's parents, Robert and Linda. They were small, bird-like people who had always looked at me with a mixture of envy and disdain. They walked to the stand clutching Bibles, looking for all the world like concerned grandparents. Linda went first. She swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Her hand didn't even tremble. Mrs. Miller Alvarez asked, "Were you present at the dinner on June 12, 2014? "Yes, I was," Linda said, her voice wavering perfectly. "It was at Doug's house. We were celebrating the sale of the company. And did you hear a conversation between Douglas and Brandon regarding the proceeds of that sale I did? It was very clear." Doug raised a glass. He was drinking scotch. He said, "Brandon, I couldn't have done this without you. 10% is yours, son. You have earned it. I remember it because I was so happy for them. I thought finally Brandon is being appreciated." She wiped a tear from her eye. A fake tear born of greed and fear. She wasn't crying for Brandon. She was crying because her daughter needed bail money. And did Mr. Bennett ever pay that money? No. Linda sniffed. He kept it all. He bought boats and cars and left Brandon with nothing. It broke my heart to see my son-in-law struggle while his father lived like a king. I looked at Brandon while she spoke. He was watching me. He was waiting for me to jump up. He was waiting for me to shout liar just like I had at the restaurant. He wanted the outburst. He needed the outburst because if I lost control, it would validate their story. It would make me look like the angry, unstable tyrant they were describing. But I didn't move. I sat with my hands clasped, breathing slowly and evenly. I looked at Linda with the same expression I would use to look at a wall that needed painting. Blank, unimpressed. This silence was my weapon. I could see it unnerving Brandon. He shifted in his chair. He whispered something to Vanessa. She hissed back at him, telling him to shut up. They were expecting a fight, but I was giving them a void. Jonathan didn't cross-examine Linda. He simply said, "No questions, Your Honor." It was a power move. It told the jury that her testimony was so irrelevant, so obviously fabricated, that it wasn't even worth the dignity of a challenge. Then Robert took the stand. He repeated the same story almost word for word. It was rehearsed. It was scripted. He added a few flourishes claiming I had hugged Brandon and called him my partner. Again, I sat silent. I thought about the files in Jonathan's briefcase. I thought about the tax returns. I thought about the flight records to Las Vegas. Let them talk. Let them pile the lies as high as the ceiling. The higher they built, the harder they would fall. When Robert finished, he glared at me. It was a look of pure malice. He hated me because I had succeeded where he had failed. He hated me because I had money and he had debt. And now he thought he was taking it from me. Jonathan stood up for cross-examination this time. "Mr. Miller," Jonathan asked. "Jonathan, you say this dinner happened on June 12th, yes?" "Absolutely. And you are certain of the date?" "I am. It was the day the sale closed." "Thank you," Jonathan said. "No further questions." Robert looked confused as he stepped down. He had expected a battle. He had expected to be grilled. He walked back to his seat, looking unsure. "The plaintiff rests," Alvarez announced. The courtroom was quiet. The jury looked at me. Some of them looked sympathetic towards Brandon. The story was compelling. The witnesses were emotional. If I had been a juror, I might have believed it too. But the play was only half over. Judge Harrison looked at Jonathan. "Mr. Mitchell, is the defense ready to proceed?" "We are, Your Honor," Jonathan said. He stood up and walked to the center of the room. He didn't call me. He didn't call character witnesses. He turned and looked directly at the plaintiff's table. "The defense calls Brandon Bennett to the stand." The air left the room. Brandon froze. He hadn't expected this. He thought he could hide behind his lawyer and his in-laws. He looked at Alvarez. Alvarez nodded nervously. He had no choice. Brandon stood up. His legs looked shaky. He walked to the witness stand and sat down. He swore the oath. His voice was a whisper. I watched my son. I watched the boy I had carried on my shoulders. I watched the man who had signed his name to a shell company used to launder stolen funds. I looked for a trace of the child I loved, but all I saw was a stranger in a suit he couldn't afford, telling lies he couldn't maintain. Jonathan walked up to the stand holding a single piece of paper. He didn't look like a lawyer anymore. He looked like an executioner. "Mr. Bennett," Jonathan said, his voice pleasant and conversational. "You have just heard your in-laws testify that you were at a dinner in Seattle on June 12, 2014. Is that correct?" "Yes," Brandon said, gripping the arms of the chair. "And you stand by that statement? You were there. I was." Jonathan nodded. He walked back to his table and picked up a thick stack of documents. The sound of the paper hitting the wood was loud in the silent room. "Then we have a mystery, Mr. Bennett," Jonathan said, turning back to him, his smile vanishing instantly. "Because I have here a flight manifest from Alaska Airlines, and I have credit card receipts from the Bellagio Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas, Nevada." Brandon's eyes went wide. "And these records," Jonathan continued, his voice rising, "show that on June 12th, 2014, the day you claim you were eating steak in Seattle, you were actually checking into a suite in Las Vegas, a suite paid for by your father. Jonathan slammed the papers onto the railing of the witness stand. So I ask you, Mr. Bennett, were you in two places at once, or are you lying to this court right now? Brandon opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at Vanessa. She was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. She knew. She knew the trap had just snapped shut. I sat in my chair and watched. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just watched the demolition begin. The first pillar had crumbled. The dust was rising, and the building was coming down. The silence that followed the revelation of the Las Vegas trip was heavy enough to crush a man, but Jonathan Mitchell was not done. He did not give Brandon time to recover. He did not give him time to invent a new excuse or look to his wife for a lifeline. Jonathan simply placed the flight records on the evidence table and walked back to the podium. He moved with the slow, deliberate grace of a predator that knows the chase is over and the kill is inevitable. Mr. Bennett, Jonathan said, his voice dropping to a conversational volume, which somehow made it more terrifying. Let us move past the date of the dinner. Perhaps you are confused. Perhaps your memory is faulty. Let us talk about the work itself. Brandon exhaled a shaky breath. He wiped his palms on his knees. Yes, the work. In your complaint, Jonathan continued, you state that you provided strategic consulting services to your father's company for 3 years leading up to the sale. You claim these services were vital. You claim they added significant value to the company. Is that correct? Yes, Brandon said, his voice gaining a little strength. I did. I helped with marketing. I helped with modernizing the bid process. I worked hard. You worked hard, Jonathan repeated. You treated it like a full-time job. It was a full-time job, Brandon insisted. I was there every day. I gave everything to that company. That is why the 10% was promised. It was compensation for sweat equity. I watched from the defense table. I remembered those years. Brandon sleeping until noon. Brandon playing video games in his underwear while I was at the site at 5 a.m. Brandon asking for gas money to go to job interviews he never attended. The audacity of his lie was breathtaking. He wasn't just lying to the court, he was lying to himself. He had rewritten his own history to make himself the hero of a story where he was actually the parasite. Jonathan nodded slowly, as if he agreed. So you were a consultant, a hard-working, essential employee, and you were doing this in 2012, 2013, and 2014. Yes. And you expected to be paid for this work? Eventually, Brandon said. That was the deal. I would get paid when the company sold. Jonathan turned to the jury. He made eye contact with the foreman, a stern woman in a gray cardigan. Then he turned back to Brandon. Mr. Bennett, I am confused. Because if you were working so hard, if you were providing such valuable services, one would assume you were a productive member of society. One would assume you were solvent. I was investing my time, Brandon said defensively. Jonathan walked back to our table. He picked up another stack of documents. These were not flight records. These were thicker. They bore the official seal of the United States Department of the Treasury. I have here your federal tax returns for the years 2012 through 2014, Jonathan said, holding them up. I obtained these through a court order during discovery. Brandon's eyes flicked to the papers, then back to Jonathan. He swallowed hard. Jonathan opened the top file. In 2014, the year of the sale, the year you claim you were working hardest, the year you claim you secured the deal, you reported your total income to the Internal Revenue Service. Do you recall what that number was? I don't have my files with me, Brandon stammered. I do, Jonathan said. He read from the line item. 0. You reported zero income. Brandon licked his lips. Well, like I said, I was waiting for the payout. I didn't get paid cash. Jonathan flipped a page. But that is not all, Mr. Bennett. Because reporting zero income is one thing. But here attached to your return is a form you signed under penalty of perjury. It is an application for unemployment benefits from the state of Washington. The courtroom went deadly still. In this application dated January 2014, Jonathan read, his voice ringing like a bell. You state, and I quote, "I am currently unemployed. I have no source of income. I am actively seeking work, but cannot find any." You received $450 a week in benefits for 6 months. Jonathan looked up over the papers. And here attached to that is your application for the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Food stamps, Mr. Bennett. In this application, you certified that you had no job, no assets, and no prospects. You received $200 a month in food assistance funded by the taxpayers. Jonathan walked up to the witness stand until he was just a few feet from Brandon. He held the lawsuit in one hand and the tax returns in the other. He held them up like scales. So I have a question for you, Mr. Bennett, and I need you to think very carefully before you answer, because the district attorney is going to be reading the transcript of this trial. Jonathan leaned in. In this lawsuit, you swore to this court that you were working full-time as a consultant for your father. In these tax documents, you swore to the federal government that you were unemployed and destitute to receive welfare benefits. He slammed both documents onto the railing. Which one is the lie, Brandon? Were you lying to the government then to steal benefits, or are you lying to this court now to steal from your father? Because you cannot be employed and unemployed at the same time. You cannot be a high-level consultant and a welfare recipient. One of these is perjury. One of these is fraud. Pick one. Brandon looked like he had been punched in the gut. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. He looked at the judge. He looked at Alvarez. Alvarez had his head in his hands. There was no objection coming. There was no lifeline. I, Brandon stuttered. Answer the question! Jonathan roared, his voice suddenly filling the room with the force of a thunderclap. Were you working, or were you not? I was working, Brandon cried out, tears starting to form in his eyes. I was helping him then. You committed federal welfare fraud, Jonathan said coldly. You stole from the taxpayers. You signed a false government document. Is that what you are telling this jury, that you are a welfare cheat? No, I didn't. Or Jonathan cut him off, or did you do no work at all? Did you sit on your couch for 3 years while your father built his legacy? And did you file this lawsuit just because you felt entitled to money? You never earned, Brandon looked at Vanessa. He was begging her with his eyes to tell him what to say. But Vanessa was staring straight ahead, her face a mask of stone. She had detached. She was cutting the dead weight. She knew the ship was going down, and she wasn't going to hold his hand while he drowned. I don't know, Brandon whispered. I don't know what you want me to say. I want the truth, Mr. Bennett, Jonathan said, stepping back. But I think we already have it. Jonathan turned to the judge. Your Honor, the defense moves to admit these tax returns into evidence. They clearly demonstrate that the plaintiff has a history of making false statements under oath for financial gain. His credibility is non-existent. Judge Harrison was looking at Brandon. The judge's face was terrifying. It was not the face of an impartial arbiter anymore. It was the face of the law offended. He looked at Brandon with eyes that were hard and sharp like flint. He looked at him with the disgust one reserves for something stuck to the bottom of a shoe. Mr. Bennett, the judge, said, his voice low and dangerous. You are in my courtroom. You are under oath. You have just admitted to filing contradictory statements to 2 different branches of the government. Do you understand the gravity of your situation? Brandon nodded mutely. He was shaking now. A visible tremor that started in his hands and shook his shoulders. "You are not just losing a lawsuit, son," the judge said. "You are confessing to a crime. I suggest you consult with your attorney immediately before you say another word that puts you in federal prison." Alvarez stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. "Your Honor, I request a recess. My client needs a moment," denied Judge Harrison barked. "You had 10 years to prepare for this moment, counselor. You filed this suit. You brought this man into my court. We are going to finish this." Jonathan looked at me. He gave me a barely perceptible nod. The demolition was almost complete. The structure was buckling. The supports were gone. Brandon sat in the witness chair, a broken man exposed as a liar and a cheat in front of the world. He had tried to frame me as a villain, but he had painted himself as a criminal. I looked at him and I felt nothing but a cold, hollow ache. This was my son. This was the boy I taught to fish. And now here he was testifying to his own corruption because he was too greedy to work and too stupid to cover his tracks. Jonathan turned back to the witness stand. "I have no further questions for this witness, Your Honor." Brandon stood up on shaky legs. He stumbled as he stepped down from the stand. He walked back to the plaintiff's table, but he didn't sit next to Vanessa. She shifted her chair away from him, creating a physical gap between them. A gap that said, "I do not know this man." But Jonathan wasn't done with her. Oh no. Brandon was just the pawn. Vanessa was the queen. And Jonathan Mitchell was about to checkmate. He turned to the judge one last time. "Your Honor, the defense has one final piece of evidence to present. It does not concern Mr. Bennett directly. It concerns the co-plaintiff, Mrs. Vanessa Bennett, and the origin of the funds they are so desperate to acquire." Vanessa's head snapped up. Her eyes went wide. She knew. In that split second, she knew that we knew. The air in the courtroom changed. It went from tense to electric. The storm wasn't over. The hurricane was just making landfall. Vanessa Bennett stood up before the judge could even address Jonathan's statement. She didn't wait for her lawyer. She didn't wait for permission. She stood up and burst into tears. It was a theatrical performance worthy of Broadway. She covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs that sounded just a little too loud to be real. "Your Honor," she wailed through her fingers, "this is harassment. This man and his lawyer are trying to destroy my reputation because I stood by my husband. They are trying to deflect from the fact that Douglas Bennett is a cruel man who starves his own family. I am an honest woman. I work hard. I have never done anything wrong in my life." She looked at the jury, her eyes swimming with practiced sorrow. "Look at him," she pointed a trembling finger at me. "He is smiling. He enjoys this. He enjoys hurting us. Please stop this. Please just let us go." Judge Harrison watched her over the rim of his glasses. He didn't look moved. He looked bored. He waited until she took a breath, then he spoke. "Are you finished, Mrs. Bennett?" Vanessa sniffled, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Yes, Your Honor. I can't believe he would stoop this low. To attack me, I am not even the one suing him, really. I am just supporting Brandon." The judge turned back to Jonathan. "Mr. Mitchell, you said you had evidence concerning the plaintiff." "Mrs. Bennett, I do, Your Honor," Jonathan said. He picked up a large manila envelope from our table. It was sealed with red tape. It bore the seal of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Jonathan walked to the bench. He didn't hand it to the bailiff this time. He handed it directly to the judge. "Your Honor, this is a certified copy of a forensic audit report conducted by the Financial Crimes Division of the FBI," Jonathan said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "It was provided to my client yesterday afternoon, pursuant to a subpoena we issued to the Compliance Department of Sterling Capital." Vanessa froze. The tissue stopped halfway to her face. Sterling Capital. The name hung in the air like a curse. The judge opened the envelope. He pulled out a thick stack of papers. He put on his reading glasses and began to read. The courtroom was so quiet, I could hear the hum of the air conditioning. I could hear Brandon's ragged breathing. I could hear the sound of Vanessa's life disintegrating. The judge read for a long time. He flipped pages. He frowned. He looked at a spreadsheet. He looked at a bank statement. Then he stopped. He looked up. His eyes locked onto Vanessa. Mrs. Bennett, the judge, said, his voice soft, but carrying a weight that made the floor shake. "Please stand up." Vanessa stood. Her legs were shaking so bad she had to hold onto the table. According to this report, the judge said, holding up a page, "You are currently employed as a senior internal auditor at Sterling Capital." "Is that correct?" "Yes," Vanessa whispered. "And part of your duties involves authorizing vendor payments for maintenance and IT services, yes?" The judge looked back at the paper. This report details a series of unauthorized transfers from Sterling Capital to 3 shell companies, Vandalay Industries Tech Solutions Corp. And Bennett Consulting. These transfers began in February of this year and ended 2 weeks ago. "Do you recognize these companies?" Vanessa opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She shook her head mutely. The judge leaned forward. "The total amount transferred to these accounts which lists you and your husband as signatories, is $312,450.82. He paused, letting the number sink in. "Now, Mrs. Bennett, I have a question, and I want you to answer it carefully." The judge picked up the lawsuit, the complaint Vanessa and Brandon had filed against me. He held it up in his other hand. "In this lawsuit, you are demanding $500,000 from Mr. Douglas Bennett. You claim this is for a contract, but my math tells me something interesting." The judge looked from the FBI report to the lawsuit. "If you take the stolen amount of $312,000, and you add the estimated tax liability for early withdrawal, and you add the legal fees you are currently paying Mr. Alvarez, the total comes to almost exactly $500,000. The judge took off his glasses. "So, Mrs. Bennett, is it a coincidence that the amount you are demanding from your father-in-law matches down to the penny the amount you need to pay back the money you embezzled before the audit starts next week?" The question hit her like a physical blow. Vanessa swayed. She grabbed the edge of the table. I didn't... It's a mistake." "It is not a mistake," the judge thundered. "It is a Ponzi scheme built on a family tragedy. You stole from your employer. You got caught. And instead of facing the music, you decided to extort an innocent man to cover your tracks. You used this court as a weapon to launder stolen money." Vanessa looked at Brandon. "Help me," she mouthed. But Brandon was staring at the table. He was gone. He had checked out. The judge pressed a button on his bench. A red light flashed near the door. The doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. 3 men in dark suits walked in. They moved with the heavy purpose of law enforcement. They weren't bailiffs. They were U.S. Marshals. Vanessa Bennett. One of the marshals said, his voice booming, "You are under arrest for wire fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering." Vanessa screamed. It was a high, thin sound of pure terror. "No. You can't. I am innocent. It was him. It was Brandon." She pointed at her husband. "He made me do it. He has gambling debts. He forced me to steal it." Brandon's head snapped up. "You liar!" he shouted, jumping to his feet. "You told me it was a bonus. You told me it was safe." The marshals didn't care who started it. They grabbed Vanessa. They pulled her arms behind her back. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was the loudest thing in the room. Click, click, click. "Brandon Bennett," the marshal said, turning to my son. "You are also under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud and money laundering. Stand up and put your hands behind your back." Brandon looked at me. His eyes were wide, filled with tears. "Dad," he whimpered. "Dad, please. Tell them. Tell them I didn't know." I looked at him. I looked at the man who had sued me, the man who had threatened to frame me, the man who had signed his name to a crime and then tried to sell me out to pay for it. I stood up slowly. I buttoned my jacket. I looked him right in the eye. "You knew, Brandon," I said, my voice steady. "You signed the checks. You spent the money. And you tried to destroy me to keep it. Dad, please help me." I turned to Jonathan. "Let's go," I said. The marshals hauled them away. Vanessa was kicking and screaming, cursing my name, cursing the judge, cursing the world. Brandon was sobbing, his legs dragging as they pulled him out the side door. The courtroom was in chaos. The jury was whispering furiously. Vanessa's parents were sitting in the front row, pale as ghosts, looking like they were about to faint. The judge banged his gavel, "Order, order." He looked at me. "Mr. Bennett," I turned back. "The court apologizes," the judge said. "This case is dismissed with prejudice, and I will be recommending that the district attorney look into perjury charges for the witnesses who testified today." He glared at Vanessa's parents. They shrank into their seats. "Thank you, Your Honor," I said. I walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was quiet. The air was cool. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The rain had stopped. The sun was shining on the Sound, turning the water to silver. I felt a hand on my shoulder. It was Jonathan. "It is done," he said. I nodded. "It is done. They are gone, Doug. They are going away for a long time. Federal guidelines for that amount, plus the conspiracy, plus the perjury. Vanessa is looking at 10 years minimum. Brandon maybe 5 if he flips on her. But they are done." I looked at my reflection in the glass. I looked older, tired, but I looked free. "Did I do the right thing, Jonathan?" I asked. Jonathan stood next to me, looking out at the city. "They were going to kill you, Doug," he said. "Maybe not with a gun, but they were going to kill your spirit. They were going to put you in a home and drain you dry. They were going to erase you. You didn't just save your money. You saved your life." I took a deep breath. It tasted like freedom. "Come on," I said. "I want to buy you a drink." We walked to the elevator. I didn't look back at the courtroom. I didn't look back at the door where my son had been dragged away in chains. That part of my life was over. The demolition was complete. The rubble was cleared. Now it was time to build something new. The silence in the courtroom after the doors closed was the loudest sound I had ever heard. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a battlefield after the artillery stops firing. The air still smelled of ozone and destruction. I sat there for a long time, staring at the empty defense table where my son had sat just minutes before. The wood was scratched. I wondered if he had done that with his fingernails in those final desperate moments. Jonathan Mitchell packed his briefcase. He did not rush me. He knew that even though we had won, I had just watched my only child be dragged away in chains. It is a strange thing to amputate your own heart to save your life. You know it was necessary. You know the limb was gangrenous, but you still feel the phantom pain. When we finally left the courthouse, the reporters were waiting. They shouted questions about the fraud, about the embezzlement, about the family betrayal. I did not answer them. I put on my sunglasses and walked to my car. I drove home to the empty house in Ballard, and for the first time in 40 years, I did not check the messages on the answering machine. I unplugged the phone, I locked the door, and I slept for 14 hours. The sentencing hearing happened 3 months later. I did not go. Jonathan went in my place. He called me afterwards. 10 years for Vanessa, he said, his voice sounding tinny over the phone line. Federal prison, no parole. The judge threw the book at her. He called her a predator who used the legal system as a weapon. I asked, staring out at the rain in my backyard. 5 years, Jonathan said. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, money laundering, and perjury. He tried to cry on the stand, Doug. He tried to say he was a victim. The judge didn't buy it. He said Brandon was the beneficiary of the crime, and his tears were just regret for getting caught. 5 years. My son would be 43 when he got out. He would have a felony record. He would have nothing. What about the girl, I asked? My granddaughter, she is with Vanessa's sister in Portland, Jonathan said. The court deemed Vanessa's parents unfit due to their perjury admission. We set up the trust like you asked. It pays for her school and her clothes directly. No cash to the guardians. She will be taken care of. Good, I said. Thank you, Jonathan. Is there anything else, Doug? Do you want to send a message to Brandon? I looked at the empty hallway of my house. I looked at the spot where he stood when he was 5 years old, showing me a drawing he made. I looked at the spot where he stood 2 weeks ago, screaming that he would destroy me. No, I said. No message. I hung up the phone. I looked around the house. It was a good house. I had built the deck myself. I had reinforced the foundation after the earthquake in 2001. But now it felt like a museum of failures. Every room held a ghost. The kitchen where I fed him. The living room where we watched football. The driveway where I taught him to drive. I could not live here anymore. This house was a monument to a life that didn't exist. It was a monument to a father who thought his love was enough. I called a real estate agent the next morning. Not the one who had witnessed the scene at the office, but a new one. I told her I wanted to sell, as is, quick closing. Quick. I didn't care about the price. I just wanted out. The market in Seattle is crazy. The house sold in 3 days to a young couple from California who worked for Amazon. They loved the vintage charm. They didn't know that the walls had absorbed decades of lies. I packed one suitcase. I took my clothes. I took my tools. I took the photo of Mary. I left everything else. The furniture, the books, the dishes. I left Brandon's childhood trophies in a box in the garage. Let the new owners throw them away. I couldn't do it. I got in my car and I drove east. I drove until the rain stopped. I drove until the mountains turned into plains, and the plains turned into swamps, and finally the swamps turned into ocean. Florida is different. The light is different. It is bright and hard, and it leaves no shadows for secrets to hide in. I bought a small condo in a community called Pelican Bay. It is a place for people like me. People who have finished their work. People who have stories they don't tell. I bought a boat. It is a 24-foot center console. Nothing fancy. Just enough to get me out onto the Gulf where the water is blue and the horizon is endless. I named her the Mary D. 6 months passed. The silence in my head finally started to match the silence of the ocean. I made friends. There is a man named Frank who lives 2 doors down. He used to be a cop in Chicago. We don't talk about our families. We talk about fishing. We talk about the tides. We talk about how to fix a carburetor. It is a good friendship. It is honest. I stopped looking over my shoulder. I stopped expecting a sheriff at my door. The knot of anger in my chest began to loosen, replaced by a calm that felt like the surface of the water on a still morning. Then the letter came. It was a Tuesday. I had just come back from the marina. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of orange and purple. I opened my mailbox. There, amongst the flyers for grocery stores and the electric bill, was a plain white envelope. It had a stamp from a correctional facility in Oregon. The return address was a number. Inmate 89402. I stood there in the warm Florida breeze and felt a chill go through me. It was not fear, not anymore. It was just a cold recognition. The past was trying to knock on the door one last time. I walked into my condo. I poured a glass of white wine. I sat on my balcony overlooking the water. I put the envelope on the table. I stared at it. I knew what was inside. I didn't need to open it to know. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I slit the envelope open. There was a single sheet of lined yellow paper written in pencil. The handwriting was familiar scrawling and rushed. Dear Dad, I hope you are happy. I hope you are enjoying your money while I rot in here. It is hell, Dad. You have no idea. The food is garbage. The guards are animals. I am scared every single day. I need money. I need money for the commissary. I need shampoo. I need stamps. I need to pay for protection because people know I came from money and they think I am rich. Vanessa filed for divorce. Can you believe that? She blamed me for everything. She is testifying against me in another case to get her sentence reduced. She is a snake, Dad. You were right about her. I'm sorry. Okay, is that what you want to hear? I'm sorry. I tried to take the house. I am sorry about the lawsuit. I was desperate. She made me do it. Please, Dad, just send me $500 a month. That is all I ask. It is nothing to you. You have millions. Don't let your son live like an animal. I am still your son. Love, Brandon. I read the letter twice. He was sorry. He was sorry because he was in prison. He was sorry because his wife turned on him. He was sorry because he needed shampoo. He wasn't sorry he tried to destroy me. He wasn't sorry he lied to a judge. He wasn't sorry he dishonored his mother's memory. He was still the same Brandon, blaming everyone else. Vanessa made him do it. The guards were animals. I was enjoying my money while he rotted. Even in his apology, there was an accusation. Even in his begging, there was entitlement. I am still your son. I looked out at the ocean. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a bruise of dark blue light on the water. Was he my son? Biologically, yes. But a son is more than DNA. A son is a legacy. A son is the person you raise to be better than you. A son is someone who respects the name you give him. Brandon had tried to sell my name for a down payment on a house he couldn't afford. He had tried to put me in a nursing home to silence me. He had looked me in the eye and threatened to frame me for assault. That wasn't a son. That was a stranger who shared my face. I took a sip of wine. It was crisp and cold. I thought about sending him the money. $500 was nothing to me. It was pocket change. It would make his life easier. It would be the fatherly thing to do. But then I remembered the check I wrote in Alvarez's office. The check he was ready to snatch from my hand, even though he knew it was a lie. If I sent him money now, I would be teaching him the same lesson I had taught him his whole life. That no matter what he did, Daddy would fix it. That there were no permanent consequences. That he could try to kill the king, and if he missed, the king would still pay for his lunch. No, I was done teaching. The curriculum was finished. The final exam had been graded. He wanted money for protection. He should have protected his integrity. He wanted shampoo. He should have kept his nose clean. I stood up. I walked to the railing of the balcony. The tide was going out, pulling the water away from the shore, cleaning the sand. I took the letter in both hands. The yellow paper felt flimsy. I didn't tear it angrily. I didn't bunch it up in a fist. I tore it slowly, methodically, once down the middle, then again, until the words were just fragments of graphite on yellow confetti. I held my hands over the railing. I opened my fingers. The wind caught the pieces. They fluttered down like dead leaves, spiraling into the dark water below. I watched them hit the surface. They floated for a second, and then the current took them. They drifted away into the dark, swallowed by the Gulf of Mexico. I didn't feel guilty. I didn't feel sad. I felt light. I went back inside and sat down. I picked up my phone. I blocked the number for the correctional facility. Then I poured another glass of wine. I am Douglas Bennett. I am 69 years old. I have no wife. I have no son. I have a boat named after the woman I loved. I have a bank account that is secure. And I have the silence. The beautiful, expensive silence of a man who owes nothing to anyone. I took a drink. It tasted like victory. And tomorrow I was going fishing. We often confuse parental love with endless sacrifice, believing we must give until we are empty to prove our devotion. But I learned the hard way that shielding a child from every consequence doesn't help them. It only teaches them to hold the knife that eventually stabs you. My son didn't need my money. He needed the accountability I denied him by always fixing his mistakes. True peace isn't found in a bank account, but in the courage to cut toxic ties even when they share your blood. Sometimes the only way to save yourself is to let others face the ruin they created. If you believe that dignity is worth more than any relationship built on greed, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice served.